The cold, unforgiving steel of the handcuffs bit into her wrists with a definitive click. The sound echoed in the pressurized silence of the first-class cabin, a metallic punctuation mark on her public humiliation. "You picked the wrong day to play dress-up, little girl," Officer Russo sneered, his voice a low growl of satisfaction. He yanked Ilara from the plush leather of seat 2A, the sudden movement jarring her small frame. All around them, a forest of smartphones had sprouted, their dark, cyclopean lenses greedily recording every mortifying second. They saw a fraud. They saw a delinquent. They saw a girl in a simple grey hoodie and worn jeans where a queen in couture should be. But as Russo, a man built like a vending machine, began to drag her toward the jet bridge, Ilara didn't scream. She didn't cry. She steadied her breathing, a technique her father had drilled into her for high-pressure board meetings, and met his gaze with an unnerving calm. "Officer," she said, her voice clear and steady, "check the FAA registry for this aircraft. Tail number N784JC. You're making a mistake that will cost this airline 9 figures." Russo laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He didn't know that the tablet she'd been studying before he'd arrived wasn't for watching movies. It held the master lease agreement for this very plane. He didn't know that the quiet, unassuming young woman he was manhandling wasn't just a passenger. She was the heir to the sky itself. And the flight wasn't just delayed. It was about to become a multi-million-dollar crime scene, grounded by the man who owned the very airframe they were standing in. The cabin of the Global Air flagship 777, Flight 88 to Geneva, was an oasis of beige and brushed nickel. The air smelled of new leather, hot towels, and the subtle cloying scent of immense wealth. For most, turning left upon boarding was a fantasy. For 20-year-old Ilara Croft, it was supposed to be a final exam. She had settled into seat 2A, a private pod that was more of a small apartment than a chair. She was dressed for anonymity, not for the Met Gala. A well-worn Georgetown University hoodie, dark wash jeans with a slight tear at the knee, and scuffed leather boots. Her dark curly hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and her face was free of makeup. She looked like a student who'd cashed in a lifetime of frequent flyer miles for one glorious trip. In a way she was. Her father, the formidable Julian Croft, CEO of Croft Aviation Holdings, had given her a simple yet impossible task. Fly to Geneva, commercial, under the radar. She was to observe every detail of the passenger experience on one of their leased aircraft, from the check-in kiosk to the quality of the champagne. A full report was due on his desk by the time he landed in his Gulfstream. "See the empire from the ground up, Ilara," he'd said. "Power is useless without perspective." She had her tablet open on the tray table, not to a movie, but to a dense 300-page PDF, the master lease agreement between Croft Aviation and Global Air. She was highlighting a clause in Section 12B regarding crew conduct and brand integrity when a shadow fell over her screen. "I'm sorry, but I think you've wandered into the wrong cabin." The voice was like chilled champagne, bubbly on the surface, but with a sharp, acidic bite. Ilara didn't look up, assuming the comment was for someone else. Then, a long, manicured finger, adorned with a diamond that could choke a horse, tapped sharply on her tablet screen, leaving a greasy smudge. "Young lady, did you not hear me? This is not the charity section." Ilara slowly raised her head. The woman standing in the aisle was a caricature of old money. She was in her late 60s, encased in a bone-colored St. John knit suit that looked both incredibly expensive and profoundly uncomfortable. Her silver-blonde hair was sculpted into a perfect, immovable helmet. A Hermes Kelly bag was slung over her arm, as if it were an extension of her own limb. Her face was a mask of polite, venomous disbelief. "Can I help you?" Ilara asked, her tone even. "You can help yourself by taking your things," the woman said, waving a dismissive hand at Ilara's canvas backpack, "and finding your correct seat. Probably somewhere near the lavatories." Her voice was pitched just loud enough for the hedge fund manager in 3B to peer over his Wall Street Journal. "This is seat 2B, my seat, and my husband will be in 2A, where you are currently squatting." Ilara held the woman's gaze. This was a test, just not the one her father had intended. She calmly picked up her phone, opened the airline app, and showed the woman her digital boarding pass. "My apologies, ma'am, but my boarding pass clearly says 2A. My name is Ilara Croft. Perhaps you're in 3A." The woman, whose name was Meredith Covington, a name synonymous with hostile takeovers and surgically enhanced poodles, let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like a startled poodle. She turned to the cabin as if addressing a courtroom. "Did you hear that? She has an app. How quaint. It must be a system glitch. Or perhaps she's one of those influencers trying to get a selfie for her little blog." Meredith leaned in, her perfume a suffocating cloud of gardenia and entitlement. "Listen to me, dear. My husband, Charles Covington, of Covington Capital, is an Onyx Elite member. We have flown this route, in these seats, for 20 years. I don't know what welfare-to-work program you slipped through, but I will not be spending 9 hours to Geneva, smelling whatever it is you're wearing." Ilara's jaw tightened. She had spent her life navigating rooms filled with people like Meredith. They saw her youth, her gender, her simple clothes, and drew 1,000 incorrect conclusions. They never saw the steel beneath. "I assure you, I paid for this ticket," Ilara said, her voice dropping a notch, becoming colder, more precise. It was the voice she used when debating contract law with her father's legal team. "I suggest you check your own boarding pass. The flight is fully booked. It's more likely your upgrade didn't clear." "My upgrade always clears," Meredith shrieked, the polite facade cracking. She began stabbing the flight attendant call button with the ferocity of a woodpecker on amphetamines. Ilara sighed. She knew the rules. She had helped draft the rules. She was in the right. But she also knew that in the court of public opinion, a Georgetown hoodie rarely won against a St. John suit. A flight attendant named Sarah hurried over, her smile stretched thin and brittle. She was young, flustered, and her eyes immediately registered Meredith's expensive attire and furious demeanor. "Mrs. Covington, so lovely to have you with us again," Sarah gushed, her voice oozing practiced deference. "Is everything all right? Can I get you a pre-departure glass of Krug?" "What's not all right?" Meredith spat, pointing a trembling finger at Ilara, "is that this person is in my husband's seat and is refusing to move." Sarah's professional smile faltered as she turned to Ilara. She took in the hoodie, the backpack, the lack of jewelry. An instant, subconscious calculation flickered in her eyes. It was a bias as old as air travel itself. Wealth shouts, poverty whispers. "Miss," Sarah said, her tone shifting from deferential to condescending, "may I please see your boarding pass?" Ilara held up her phone again. "It's 2A. Ilara Croft." Sarah scanned it with her handheld device. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. The pass was valid. The name matched. But Meredith was now tapping her foot impatiently, radiating an aura of impending corporate complaint. "It's a forgery," Meredith insisted, her voice rising. "Look at her. Does she look like she can afford a $20,000 ticket? She probably used a stolen credit card. If you don't remove her this instant, I will be on the phone with your head of North American operations, before we even push back. I have his personal cell number." The threat hung in the air like toxic fumes. Sarah paled. A formal complaint from an Onyx Elite member could mean a disciplinary review, or worse. She looked back at Ilara, her decision made. "Miss, it appears there's been a double booking error in our system," she said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "Mrs. Covington is one of our most valued legacy clients. I'm going to have to ask you to move." "Move where?" Ilara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "We have a lovely seat available in premium economy, 14B, Sarah offered, as if it were a generous compromise. "We can, of course, process a fare difference refund upon landing." Ilara didn't move a muscle. "I didn't purchase a seat in premium economy. I purchased this one. As per your own contract of carriage, Section 4, subsection C, in an oversold situation, the passenger already boarded and seated has priority. The protocol is to ask for volunteers, not to forcibly downgrade a confirmed, seated passenger." Meredith gasped. "Don't you dare quote rules to me, you insolent child." "Ma'am, please," Sarah pleaded, turning her desperation on Ilara. "We're holding up the entire flight. Mrs. Covington is very distressed. If you would just cooperate, we can sort this out quietly." "No," Ilara said, the single word ringing with finality. "I paid for this seat. I am legally entitled to this seat, and I am staying in this seat." Sarah's face hardened. Her patience, already frayed, snapped. The captain was on the radio, asking why the cabin wasn't secure for departure. "Miss, if you refuse to comply with a crew member's instruction, you are committing a federal offense. I am now instructing you to vacate this seat. And I am informing you that your instruction is unlawful," Ilara countered, her heart finally beginning to hammer against her ribs. "It's based on customer intimidation, not airline policy or federal law." Meredith smirked, a triumphant, ugly expression. "She's a threat. Call security. Call the police. Get her off this plane." Sarah nodded curtly at Meredith. "I'll inform the captain." As the flight attendant marched toward the cockpit, Ilara watched her go. She pulled out her phone. The signal was fading as the ground crew prepared to close the main cabin door. She scrolled to the contact, simply labeled JEE. Her finger hovered over the call button. She hated this. Her father's entire lesson was about self-sufficiency, about proving she could handle the world without his name as a shield. Calling him now would be admitting defeat. It would prove she was still just a child playing in his sandbox. She looked up and saw the other first-class passengers staring. A man in 1C was openly filming. They weren't just watching. They were waiting. Waiting for the show. Waiting for the imposter to be cast out. She put the phone down on her lap. Not yet, she thought. Give them one last chance to do the right thing. 10 minutes stretched into an eternity. The air in the cabin grew thick and stale. The captain's voice finally came over the intercom, tight with annoyance. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a slight delay at the gate due to a passenger seating issue. We appreciate your patience and hope to be on our way shortly." Meredith Covington stood in the aisle, a self-appointed sentinel, glaring down at Ilara. Then, a new sound cut through the cabin's low hum. The heavy, rhythmic thud of boots on the metal floor of the jet bridge. 2 Port Authority police officers entered the aircraft. The one in the lead, Officer Russo, was a bull of a man with a thick neck, a buzz cut that looked like it could strike a match, and a permanent scowl etched onto his face. He chewed his gum with a menacing rhythm, his eyes sweeping the cabin with bored disdain. Sarah, the flight attendant, met them at the galley. She pointed a trembling finger toward row 2. That's her. She's refusing to deplane. Russo didn't ask for details. He didn't ask for Ilara's side of the story. He saw a young woman in a hoodie, sitting in a seat that cost more than his last 3 cars combined, and a wealthy older woman looking indignant. His mind, a simple machine of prejudice and procedure, was already made up. He stomped down the aisle, his partner flanking him. All right, show's over. Let's go. Ilara looked up, a cold knot of genuine fear tightening in her stomach. Officer, I have a valid ticket. I haven't broken any laws. The airline wants you off. That makes you a trespasser, Russo said flatly, his hand resting on his belt, inches from his handcuffs. You can walk off, or I can carry you off. Your choice. I have a contract of carriage, Ilara argued, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to control it. They can't remove me without cause, and a dispute over a seat with another passenger is not sufficient cause, especially when my ticket is valid. I don't give a damn about your contract of carriage, Russo barked, leaning over her, invading her personal space until she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. The flight crew is in charge of this plane. When they say jump, you ask how high. You are now delaying a commercial flight and creating a disturbance. Do you want to spend the night in Geneva or in a holding cell at JFK? Arrest her, Meredith chimed in, her eyes gleaming with vindictive pleasure. She's probably got drugs in that shabby backpack of hers, too. I'm not moving, Ilara said, her hands gripping the armrests. This is wrong. You are violating my civil rights. Russo's face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like Ilara. He was used to immediate, fearful compliance. Last chance. Get up. I'm calling my lawyer, Ilara said, reaching for her phone on her lap. It was the wrong move. Russo lunged. In one swift, brutal motion, he grabbed Ilara's wrist, twisting it with practiced force. The phone clattered to the floor. A sharp, searing pain shot up her arm. Ow! You're hurting me, she cried out, the shock and pain breaking through her composure. Resisting arrest, Russo shouted, his voice booming for the benefit of the watching passengers and their recording phones. He hauled her out of the seat. Ilara was athletic, but Russo was pure, immovable mass. He dragged her into the aisle as if she were a sack of laundry. Hey, stop that! A man in row 4 shouted. She's just a kid. Leave her alone. Stay out of it, Russo's partner snapped, his hand hovering over his taser. Police business. Ilara stumbled, her boots catching on the carpet. Let go of me. You have no idea what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, Russo growled, shoving her forward. He spun her around and slammed her against the bulkhead wall next to the galley, the impact knocking the wind out of her. He kicked her legs apart into a wide, humiliating stance. I'm taking out the trash. He unclipped his handcuffs. The cold metal kissed her left wrist. Please, Ilara gasped, her cheek pressed against the cool plastic of the wall. Just let me make one phone call. Please. Russo let out that cruel, dry laugh again. You get your phone call at the station, Princess. He wrenched her other arm behind her back to secure the second cuff. In that moment, as the metal closed around her second wrist, something inside Ilara shifted. The fear receded, replaced by a glacial calm. The game was over. Her father's test was ruined. Now it was time for a different kind of lesson. She stopped struggling. She went completely still. Officer Russo, she said, her voice devoid of emotion, eerily serene. My father is Julian Croft, and you have just assaulted his daughter on an aircraft leased from his company. The tail number is N784JC. Russo paused for a fraction of a second, the specific detail giving him a flicker of doubt. Then he scoffed, shaking it off. Yeah, right. And I'm the Pope. Tell it to the judge. Click. The second cuff locked into place. Get her off my plane, Meredith Covington said with a triumphant sniff. She gracefully stepped over Ilara's fallen canvas backpack and settled into seat 2A, fluffing the lumbar pillow with a sigh of deep, profound satisfaction. Russo shoved Ilara toward the open door of the aircraft, out into the harsh, unforgiving lights of the jet bridge. The walk from Gate C21 to the Port Authority substation in Terminal 4 was a modern-day perp walk. Officer Russo made no attempt to be discreet. He paraded Ilara through the bustling terminal, his grip on her upper arm a vice of brute authority. Tourists and business travelers stopped and stared. Whispers followed them like a foul odor. Look at that girl. What did she do? Must be serious. They've got her in cuffs. Then came the phones. Again. A new, larger audience now captured her degradation. A teenager live-streamed her on TikTok, his face a mask of gleeful shock. Jeff caressed. Karen wins. Flight drama. The hashtags were already trending. Ilara kept her head high. She focused on her breathing, on the rhythmic squeak of Russo's boots on the polished floor. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. She caught the eye of a woman filming her, a grandmotherly type with a shocked expression. Ilara looked directly into the lens. "My name is Ilara Croft," she said, her voice carrying over the terminal's din. "I am being arrested because a woman wanted the seat I paid for." Russo jerked her arm violently. "I told you to shut your mouth. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." But the damage was done. The video clip, her clear statement, cutting through the chaos, was already rocketing through the digital stratosphere. By the time Russo shoved her through the thick metal door of the police substation, the clip had 100,000 views. By the time he chained her to a metal table in a sterile, windowless interrogation room, it had hit 1 million. The room smelled of burnt coffee and industrial-grade bleach. It was the smell of misery. Russo dropped into the chair opposite her, his bulk making it creak in protest. He started typing her arrest report into a battered laptop. "Name?" he grunted. "I've told you. Ilara Croft." He typed it slowly, his sausage-like fingers pecking at the keys. "Address? 1 Beacon Court, Manhattan." Russo stopped typing. He looked up, a derisive smirk spreading across his face. 1 Beacon Court. Sure. Let's try for some honesty. What housing project you living in? My identification is in my backpack, which you confiscated, Ilara said, her voice flat. Russo grabbed her canvas bag and unceremoniously dumped its contents onto the metal table. Out tumbled a well-read copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, a tube of Burt's Bees lip balm, a slim leather wallet, and a set of keys. Russo's eyes snagged on the keys. The fob wasn't plastic. It was a heavy piece of milled aluminum bearing the distinct, prancing horse of a Ferrari. He frowned. He picked up the wallet. It was simple, unadorned, but the leather was impossibly soft. He flipped it open and pulled out her driver's license. Ilara Croft. Address, 1 Beacon Court. His frown deepened. Tucked behind it was a credit card. It wasn't plastic. It was a sleek, heavy card made of polished black titanium. The J.P. Morgan Reserve card, the invitation-only piece of metal for clients with over $10 million in assets. Russo's aggressive gum-chewing slowed to a halt. He stared at the card, then at the girl in the hoodie. "Stolen," he muttered, more to convince himself than her. "Has to be." "Run the card," Ilara challenged him, her voice like ice. "Run my name. Run the tail number I gave you. Do your job, Officer Russo." The door to the interrogation room burst open with such force it slammed against the wall. A sergeant with salt and pepper hair and the weary eyes of a man who had seen everything twice stormed in. His name tag read Diaz. He was holding a tablet, and his face was ashen. "Russo, what in the goddamn hell did you do?" Diaz barked, his voice a panicked roar. "Just processing a disorderly conduct, Sarge. Trespassing, resisting, suspects uncooperative, carrying a stolen high-end credit card." Diaz strode to the table, his eyes wide with a terror Russo had never seen before. He glanced at Ilara, then at the viral video paused on his tablet screen, then back at Russo. "Stolen?" Diaz hissed, his voice dropping to a strangled whisper. "Russo, you monumental idiot. The entire internet is on fire. Do you have any idea who she is?" "Some punk kid who wouldn't give up her seat. She's Julian Croft's daughter," Diaz yelled, slamming the tablet down on the table. "Julian Croft, the guy who owns half the planes at this airport. The guy whose company just underwrote the bond for the entire Terminal 4 expansion project. The man who had dinner with the police commissioner last week." Russo froze. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly grey. He looked at the black titanium card in his hand. He looked at the Ferrari keys. He looked at the girl. She was dressed. "Dressed like what, officer?" Ilara interjected, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "Not rich enough for you? Not white enough for Mrs. Covington?" Diaz ignored Russo and turned to Ilara, his entire demeanor shifting into one of frantic, desperate apology. "Miss Croft, I am Sergeant Diaz. On behalf of the Port Authority Police, I am so sorry. This is a catastrophic misunderstanding. Please let me get those cuffs off you right now." "Don't you touch me," Ilara said, recoiling. "I want my phone call. I want to call my father. Now!" Diaz shot a murderous glare at Russo. "Get her phone. And then go sit in the corner and pray, Russo. Pray to every god you know that Julian Croft is a forgiving man." As Russo scrambled to retrieve Ilara's phone from the evidence bag, the landline on Diaz's desk began to ring. It was a special red phone, a direct line from the airport's highest command. Diaz snatched it up. "Sergeant Diaz." He listened, his body going rigid. "Yes, Commissioner. She's right here." "Yes, sir. We are. We are just now understanding the full gravity of the situation." His eyes darted to Ilara. He swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I'll put him on." He held the receiver out to Ilara, his hand trembling. "It's for you." Ilara took the phone. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was quiet, controlled, and colder than the vacuum of space. It was the voice that made CEOs tremble and stock markets plummet. "Ilara, are you injured?" "I'm okay, Dad. My wrist is badly bruised. They slammed me against a wall." A silence descended on the line, a silence so profound and heavy it felt like it had its own gravitational pull. "Stay exactly where you are," Julian Croft said. "I'm rerouting. I'll be there in 20 minutes. And Ilara?" "Yes?" "Watch the tarmac." Aboard Global Air Flight 88, a fragile sense of order had been restored. The troublemaker was gone. The flight attendants, led by a visibly relieved Sarah, were pouring champagne and offering profuse apologies for the unfortunate disturbance. Meredith Covington was ensconced in seat 2A, the throne she had rightfully conquered. She'd already posted a triumphant selfie to her Instagram story, champagne flute in hand. Caption: "Some people just don't understand the rules. But they learn." Off to Geneva. First class life. Know your place. The plane finally pushed back from the gate. The safety video played. The massive GE90 engines spooled up with a deep, soul-stirring hum. Meredith closed her eyes, imagining the envious glances she'd receive at the Zurich Gala. The aircraft taxied toward the active runway, joining the queue for takeoff. She felt the plane turn, lining up with the runway markers. This was it. And then, nothing. The roar of the engines she was anticipating never came. Instead, they spooled down, their powerful hum fading to a near-silent whisper. The air conditioning faltered. The plane, poised on the very edge of flight, shuddered to a complete stop. Meredith's eyes snapped open. "Oh, for heaven's sake, now what?" she groaned to her husband. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. It sounded completely different. All the previous annoyance was gone, replaced by sheer, unadulterated confusion. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. It appears we have been ordered by air traffic control to hold our position. We are being denied takeoff clearance. Please remain seated." In the cockpit, Captain Harris was staring at his console in disbelief. It wasn't just ATC. A red flag had appeared on his flight management system, a message he had never seen in 30 years of flying. "Aircraft lease non-compliant. Do not proceed. Ground immediately." "Tower, Global 88, say again," Harris demanded into his headset. "Global 88, your takeoff clearance is revoked." The controller's voice was tight and formal. "You are ordered to return to the gate. I repeat, return to gate C-21 immediately." "On what grounds?" Harris demanded. "We are cleared for departure." A new voice, cold and authoritative, cut through the frequency. It was the head of Global Air's own operations center. "Captain Harris, turn the plane around. That is a direct order from the CEO." "What the hell is going on, operations?" "The lease on your aircraft, tail number N784JC, has just been suspended by the lien holder, Croft Aviation Holdings," the voice said, each word a hammer blow. "They've invoked the brand integrity clause. Effective immediately. If you move that plane one more inch toward that runway, you are piloting a stolen asset. Turn the plane around. Now." Captain Harris looked at his first officer, his face ashen. "Croft Aviation. That's Julian Croft." Back in the cabin, the lights flickered. The plane began a slow, ponderous, deeply shameful U-turn on the taxiway. Meredith Covington slammed her empty champagne flute down. "This is utterly unacceptable. Attendant, why are we going back?" Sarah hurried over, her face a mask of pure panic. She'd just gotten the news from the purser. "Mrs. Covington," she whispered, her voice trembling. The flight has been cancelled." "Cancelled? Why?" "Because," Sarah said, her eyes involuntarily flicking to the empty seat where Ilara had been. "The man who owns this airplane is very, very angry." The Port Authority substation had transformed from a dingy office into a high-stakes command center under siege. Officer Russo was slumped in a corner, stripped of his badge and gun, looking like a man who had just watched his own life burn down. Sergeant Diaz was pacing frantically, speaking in hushed, terrified tones on the phone with the police union representative. Ilara sat in a chair, the handcuffs long gone, a paramedic gently wrapping her bruised wrist. The substation's heavy main doors didn't just open, they were flung wide. Julian Croft's private security team, 4 men who looked like they were carved from granite and bad intentions, entered first. They moved with the silent, fluid efficiency of a predator, securing the room before anyone could even react. Then, Julian Croft walked in. He was wearing a dark, impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than the entire substation's annual budget. He wasn't shouting. He didn't look angry. He looked worse. He looked like a natural disaster given human form. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned the room and found Ilara. "Dad." Her voice was a small whisper. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into a fierce, protective hug. He held her for a long moment, then pulled back, examining her face, his gaze lingering on the professionally wrapped bandage on her wrist. A single muscle in his jaw twitched. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the terrified officers. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Who?" The word was spoken so softly it was almost a whisper, yet it landed with the force of a bomb. Sergeant Diaz stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Mr. Croft, I am Sergeant Diaz. I am the commanding officer here. The full responsibility for this operational failure is mine." "I didn't ask for your rank," Julian interrupted, his voice lethally calm. "I asked, who?" Elara, still standing by her father's side, simply lifted her uninjured hand and pointed a single trembling finger at the corner. "Officer Russo." Julian's gaze shifted to Russo. The disgraced officer struggled to his feet, trying to salvage a shred of authority. "Sir, I was following protocol. The flight crew identified her as a disruptive passenger. She was refusing to deplane." "Protocol," Julian repeated the word, as if it were a foreign object in his mouth. He began to walk slowly toward Russo. "You put a 20-year-old girl in handcuffs because an entitled bigot wanted her seat. You dragged her through a crowded airport to humiliate her. You physically assaulted her when she asserted her rights. You call that protocol. I call it barbarism." "She was resisting," Russo stammered, taking an involuntary step back. "My legal team is currently filing a civil rights lawsuit against the Port Authority, Global Air, and you, personally, Officer Russo," Julian said, his voice a silken threat. "They will strip you of your pension, your house, and your dignity. But that process is slow. I find I am not a patient man." Julian pulled out his phone. He dialed a number and put it on the speaker. "Commissioner," he said. The police commissioner's voice, tinny and frantic, filled the room. "Julian, my God, I've seen the video. It's indefensible. I am on my way to the airport now. Whatever you need." "I want two things," Julian said, his eyes locked on Russo. "First, I want his badge. Not a suspension, not a desk job. I want him fired for cause, and I want the district attorney to press assault charges by morning. If that doesn't happen..." The silence that followed Julian Croft's call was a living thing, a heavy, pressurized entity that filled the sterile interrogation room. It was a silence composed of Russo's dawning, abject terror, Sergeant Diaz's frantic mental calculations of damage control, and Elara's own ringing ears. The world had just tilted on its axis, not with a violent lurch, but with the quiet, inexorable certainty of a tectonic plate shifting deep beneath the earth. Julian's voice, even filtered through the cheap plastic of the landline, had been a weapon of surgical precision. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't threatened with brute force. He had simply outlined a series of consequences, each one a perfectly logical, financially devastating domino falling onto the next. It was the kind of power Elara had always observed from a distance, a force that didn't need to raise its voice because it owned the room, the building, and the airspace for 50 miles in every direction. Now, that force had been unleashed on her behalf, and the fallout was suffocating. Russo, a man who had been the embodiment of swaggering authority not 20 minutes ago, was now a hollowed-out uniform. He fumbled with his belt, his hands shaking so badly he could barely unclip his badge. The metallic clink as it hit the Formica desk was his career's epitaph. He didn't look at Elara as he was escorted out by another officer, his face a pasty mask of disbelief. He had picked a fight with a girl in a hoodie and lost a war against an empire. Sergeant Diaz, his face slick with sweat, approached Elara as if she were an unexploded bomb. "Miss Croft," he began, his voice a strained whisper, "a car is waiting to take you to the private terminal. Your father's security is here. We have..." We have processed your release. All charges have been expunged. The record of your arrest has been vaporized." He spoke the last word with a kind of fearful awe. Ilara looked down at her hands. The red, angry welts from the handcuffs were already beginning to bloom into purple bruises. She flexed her fingers, feeling the dull ache in her wrist. Vaporized, as if it had never happened. But it had happened. The humiliation, the fear, the searing pain in her twisted arm, the cold steel against her skin. Those things were real. They were now a part of her, etched into her memory. They couldn't be expunged with a phone call. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Diaz froze. "No, Miss Croft, your father is waiting. I'm not leaving yet," she said, looking up, her eyes clear and cold. "There's someone I need to speak to first. The flight attendant. Sarah, I want her brought here." Diaz looked utterly bewildered. The flight attendant. But Global Air has already terminated her employment. She's being escorted from the airport. "Then unescort her," Ilara stated, a sliver of her father's implacable will in her tone. "I'm not asking, Sergeant. I am the victim of a crime that was initiated on her false report. I want to face my accuser. Find her." For a moment, Diaz looked as if he might argue, but then he saw the look in her eyes. It was the same look he'd imagined was on the other end of that phone call. He nodded weakly and scurried out of the room, barking orders into his radio. Ilara sat alone in the silence. Her father's lesson: see the empire from the ground up. Power is useless without perspective, echoed in her mind. Her father's response had been pure power, a magnificent, overwhelming display of force that had bent the world to his will. It was a reckoning. But was it justice? He had punished the perpetrators, but he hadn't addressed the rot that allowed it to happen. He had treated the symptom, not the disease. The disease was the casual, reflexive judgment, the ingrained bias that saw a hoodie and jeans and automatically assigned a value of 0. Firing one flight attendant and one police officer wouldn't cure that. She thought of Sarah. She remembered the young woman's initial panic, the desperate calculation in her eyes as she weighed Ilara's hoodie against Meredith Covington's St. John suit. It wasn't an act of pure malice. It was an act of fear. Fear of a complaint from an Onyx elite member. Fear of losing her job. Sarah had made the wrong choice, a terrible and damaging choice, but Ilara understood the pressure that had led to it. She had seen that same fear in the eyes of junior executives at her father's company, desperate to please the biggest voice in the room. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Sarah was led in, looking small and lost. Her crisp uniform was slightly rumpled, her face pale and stained with tears. She wasn't accompanied by a police officer, but by one of Julian's security detail, a silent man who took up a position by the door and blended into the wall. Sarah looked at Ilara, her expression a mixture of terror and confusion. They said you wanted to see me," Sarah whispered, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. Ilara gestured to the chair Russo had vacated. "Please, sit down." Sarah sat gingerly on the edge of the chair, as if expecting it to electrocute her. "Do you know who I am?" Ilara asked, her voice even, devoid of accusation. Sarah nodded, swallowing hard. "I do now. Everyone does. It's all over the news. I'm so sorry. I never would have. If I had known—" "If you had known who my father was," Ilara finished for her. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "That's the problem, Sarah. It shouldn't matter who my father is. It should only have mattered that I had a valid ticket for seat 2A. It should only have mattered that I was a human being who was being harassed. Sarah flinched, fresh tears welling in her eyes. Mrs. Covington, she's a nightmare. She files a complaint if the ice in her drink is the wrong shape. A formal complaint from an Onyx member can get you put on probation for months. 3 of those and you're out. I have a mortgage. My mother is sick. I panicked. I saw her suit and her bag and your hoodie, and I made a calculation. It was wrong. God, it was so wrong, and I'm so sorry. Here it was, the raw, ugly truth of it. It wasn't about right and wrong. It was about risk management. Elara, the unknown quantity in the cheap clothes, was the path of least resistance. You didn't just make a calculation, Elara said, her voice hardening slightly. You made a choice. You lied about a double booking. You refused to follow the airline's own contract of carriage, which I quoted to you. And when I stood my ground, you and Mrs. Covington escalated it until a man with a gun was dragging me out of my seat. You stood there and watched him slam me against a wall. You watched him put me in handcuffs. Your calculation had consequences, Sarah. Consequences that will stay with me for a very long time. Sarah began to sob, her shoulders shaking. I know. They fired me. My career is over. I'll be blacklisted. I deserve it. I want you to know I'm not a monster. I was just scared. Elara let her cry for a moment, the sound echoing in the small, sterile room. This was the perspective her father's raw power couldn't see. The messy, human fear that drove bad decisions. Vengeance was easy. Understanding was hard. She took out her phone. The screen was shattered, a spiderweb of cracks radiating from the point of impact on the cabin floor. She navigated to a new email, her thumb moving surely over the broken glass. What's your employee ID number? Elara asked. Sarah looked up, confused, hiccuping through her sobs. What? Your employee ID number, Elara repeated patiently. Stammering, Sarah recited the number. Elara typed it into the email, along with Sarah's full name. The email was addressed to the CEO of Global Air, a man she'd had dinner with last Christmas. Subject: Reinstatement, GA Flight 88 Ita. David. Regarding the incident on N784JC today, the termination of flight attendant Sarah Jenkins, ID 734219B, is to be rescinded, effective immediately. Instead, she is to be placed on a 3-month, fully paid leave of absence. During this time, she will be assigned to work directly with my office at Croft Aviation to help develop a new, mandatory training module for all Global Air cabin crew. The module will be focused on de-escalation, implicit bias recognition, and enforcement of the contract of carriage, particularly concerning passenger rights regardless of perceived social status. Her participation is not optional. Failure to comply will be considered a material breach of the Croft Aviation Global Air Master Lease Agreement, Section 12B. Let me know when it's done. Regards, Elara Croft. She hit send. A quiet swoosh filled the room. Sarah stared at her, her mouth agape. What? What did you just do? I didn't save your job, Elara said, setting the phone down. I repurposed it. You're going to help me fix the system that made you choose a rich woman's comfort over a young woman's rights. You're going to take the lesson you learned today, the hard way, and you're going to help me teach it to 10,000 other flight attendants, so this never, ever happens to anyone again. That's your penance, and it's your opportunity. For the first time, a flicker of something other than fear appeared in Sarah's eyes. It was a dawning, fragile hope. Now go, Elara said, her voice softening. Go home. Get some rest. My office will be in touch on Monday. Sarah stood up on shaky legs. Thank you, she whispered. the words thick with a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. "Thank you." She practically ran from the room. Ilara took a deep breath. It didn't feel as viscerally satisfying as watching Russo's career implode, but it felt right. It felt constructive. It felt like perspective. Her father was waiting for her just outside the substation, standing beside a black, armored Escalade. His security team formed a discreet perimeter. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I heard what you did," he said as she approached. "You had the room bugged?" she asked with a wry smile. "I own the company that makes the security systems for this airport," he replied, a faint hint of pride in his voice. "Sarah Jenkins, you gave her a second chance." "I gave her a new assignment," Ilara corrected him. "You taught me that every asset in the Empire should be productive." Julian Croft looked at his daughter, at the frayed hoodie, the tear in her jeans, the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the bandage on her wrist. He saw not a child who needed his protection, but a leader who was forging her own definition of power. He nodded slowly. "Come," he said, his voice softer now. "Let's go meet your other accuser." Gate C-21 was a scene of controlled pandemonium. Julian's corporate team, a swarm of ruthlessly efficient people in dark suits, had taken over. They were rebooking passengers, distributing vouchers, and managing the chaos with practiced ease. The moment Julian and Ilara entered the gate area, a pathway cleared through the crowd as if by magic. And there, at the center of it all, was Meredith Covington. She was being detained, not by police, but by the velvet rope of social exclusion. She stood alone near the gate desk, her husband Charles beside her, his face a thunderous mask of rage. She was shrieking into her phone, a final desperate attempt to wield the only kind of power she understood. "I don't care who he is. This is an outrage. I am an Onyx Elite member. I will sue this airline into oblivion." Ilara walked toward her, her father a half-step behind, a silent, imposing shadow. Meredith saw her, and her face contorted with venom. This is your fault, you little delinquent. My husband will see to it that your family is ruined." Charles Covington stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Julian," he snarled, "call off your dogs. This is insane. Cancelling a flight? Threatening my firm? All over some spoiled brat's tantrum?" Julian Croft didn't even look at him. His eyes were on his daughter. This was her stage. Ilara stopped a few feet from Meredith. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The entire gate area had fallen silent, a captive audience for the final act. "It wasn't a tantrum, Mrs. Covington," Ilara said, her voice calm and clear. "It was a contract dispute. You see, I bought a ticket, which is a contract. It entitled me to occupy seat 2A. You tried to forcibly and illegally break that contract." "You were a threat," Meredith shrieked. "Was I?" Ilara countered. "There are at least 30 videos of our interaction, and they are all trending globally right now. They show you harassing me. They show you lying to the cabin crew. They show me sitting quietly, quoting the airline's own regulations. The only threat in that cabin was to your ego, which couldn't handle the idea that someone who looks like me could afford to sit in a seat next to you." She took a step closer. "My father's lesson for me today was about perspective. And from my perspective, you are not powerful. You are a parasite. You feed on the fear of service workers and the deference you believe your husband's money buys you. But it's not real power. It's a performance, and the show just got cancelled." "We'll see about that," Charles Covington blustered. "Our lawyers will." "Your lawyers will be busy with your board of directors tomorrow morning, Charles," Ilara said, turning her cool gaze on him. when they have to explain why Covington Capital just lost its anchor position on a 9-figure aerospace financing deal because your wife couldn't behave herself on a commercial flight. Reputational risk is a funny thing. It's so much harder to build than it is to destroy. Meredith's face had gone from red to a blotchy, unhealthy white. The foundation of her world, the absolute belief in her own untouchability, was crumbling before her eyes. You called me a delinquent, a squatter. Charity, Elara continued, her voice a clinical dissection. You demanded to know my place. Well, I've found it. My place is on the board of the company that owns this terminal. My place is in the office that signs off on the financing for your husband's biggest deals. My place is right here, deciding your fate. She looked at Meredith, not with hatred, but with a kind of pitying finality. You won't be ruined financially. My father is not that crude. No, your punishment would be far more fitting. You built your entire identity on being seen, on being important, on being an Onyx elite. From this moment on, you are invisible. You are banned from this airline and its partners. Your name will be a footnote in a business school case study about liability. You will fly commercial, in the back, on budget airlines, if they'll even have you. You wanted me to know my place. Now, you will learn yours. Enjoy the view from the ground. Elara turned her back on them. She didn't need to see the aftermath. She didn't need to watch the lawyers arrive, or see the dawning horror on their faces. She had said what needed to be said. As she and her father walked toward the jet bridge that led not to the 777, but to their waiting Gulf Stream, the passengers who had been watching erupted into spontaneous, thunderous applause. It wasn't for her father's money. It was for her. Later, as they sliced through the stratosphere at 51,000 feet, the lights of the eastern seaboard a galaxy beneath them, Julian passed her a tablet. It was displaying a live feed of Covington Capital's stock, already plummeting in after-hours trading. A reckoning, he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. Elara looked at the frantic red line, then shook her head. No, that's just a byproduct. That's your way, Dad. A scorched earth campaign. It's effective, but it leaves nothing behind but ashes. She picked up her own tablet, the one with the cracked screen. She had a blank document open. The title was The Croft Aviation Holdings Report on the Passenger Experience, Global Air Flight 88. Justice, she said softly, is about building something better on the land after you've cleared it. He looked at what she was writing. It wasn't just a summary of events. It was a multi-point plan, a proposal for a new digital system to protect passengers from unlawful downgrades, a budget for the new de-escalation training module, a plan for a new class of service designed for anonymity, for travelers who wanted privacy without judgment. It wasn't testimony. It was a blueprint. Julian Croft leaned back in his leather seat, the stock ticker forgotten. He looked at his daughter, truly saw her, and for the first time in a long time, he was the one who was learning the lesson. Power, he realized, wasn't just about bending the world to your will. It was about having the perspective, the courage, and the wisdom to build a better one. And his daughter, the girl in the hoodie, was the architect.